The next morning, I called an emergency meeting at Murphy's coffee shop downtown. Ruby arrived with a briefcase full of documents. My contractor friend Marcus showed up with blueprints tucked under his arm, and Dolores, the retired librarian who'd become our unofficial research coordinator, brought a notebook thick enough to choke a horse. The aroma of fresh pastries mixed with the sound of Ruby's pen scratching across legal pads as we mapped out our strategy. We had 3 fronts to fight on, and we were going to coordinate them like a military operation. First, the legal counterattack, Ruby announced, spreading papers across our corner table. We're filing a countersuit for harassment, property damage, and filing false reports. The key is timing. Countersuits filed within 30 days of the original complaint carry significantly more weight than delayed responses. Marcus leaned forward, his weathered hands tracing the property lines on my grandfather's old survey. While you're handling the legal side, I'll help with the construction strategy. We're going to build you a dock that's so perfectly legal, so professionally constructed, that nobody can question it. Here's a knowledge nugget that saved me thousands. Improving your property with proper permits makes it nearly impossible for neighbors to claim nuisance status. When you follow all regulations and use licensed contractors, you're building legal armor around your property rights. I've already started the permit process, Marcus continued. Full structural engineering report, environmental impact assessment, the works. It'll cost you about $8,000, but when we're done, you'll have a dock that meets every code requirement and then some. Dolores, meanwhile, had been busy with her own investigation. I've been digging through public records going back 40 years, she said, flipping through pages of handwritten notes. Veronica's property has quite a history. 3 different environmental violations, 2 failed septic systems, and a foundation that was built without proper permits. The financial strategy was equally important. I'd secured a construction loan for the dock renovation, using my steady income as an electrician and my property's clear title as collateral. The monthly payments were manageable, and the completed dock would actually increase my property value. But the real genius was in the DIY surveillance strategy. Marcus had helped me install additional security cameras with motion sensors, creating a complete perimeter monitoring system. The cameras were positioned to capture every angle of my property line, with clear views of the disputed shoreline area. Here's something most people don't know, Marcus said, pulling out his smartphone. Modern GPS surveying apps are accurate within 3 feet, more than sufficient for property line disputes. We're going to create a digital map of your entire property that any court will accept as evidence. Ruby was already planning the psychological warfare. The key is to proceed with normal property use while documenting every interaction. Stay polite but firm and let her escalate while you maintain the high ground. She'd even prepared a list of Minnesota nice responses to Veronica's inevitable provocations. Things like, "I'm sorry you feel that way," and "I'm just following the county's recommendations," that would sound reasonable to any judge while probably driving Veronica crazy. The timeline coordination was crucial. Veronica's financial pressure would peak in about 60 days when her next lien payment was due. My dock construction permits had been approved for a 45-day timeline, which meant I'd have a beautiful legal structure in place, just as her desperation reached its maximum. The court date was scheduled for 75 days out, which gave us plenty of time to build our case while letting Veronica's mounting legal bills eat into her dwindling resources. "Remember," Ruby said, closing her briefcase with a satisfied snap, "we're not trying to destroy her. We're just protecting your rights. If she wants to bankrupt herself fighting a battle she can't win, that's her choice." Marcus gathered up his blueprints and shook my hand. "By the time I'm done with your dock, it'll be the most beautiful structure on the lake. Every morning when she looks out her window, she'll see exactly what she tried to steal and couldn't." Dolores patted my shoulder with the kind of maternal confidence that retired librarians specialize in. "Don't worry, dear. Truth has a way of winning in the end, especially when it's properly documented." As we left Murphy's coffee shop, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: optimism. For the first time since this whole mess started, I wasn't just reacting to Veronica's attacks. I had a plan, I had allies, and I had the patience to let her own desperation work against her. The smell of fresh coffee lingered on my jacket as I walked to my truck. Across town, Veronica was probably planning her next move, convinced that money and legal intimidation would eventually wear me down. She was about to learn that working-class persistence beats entitled desperation every single time. If I thought Veronica would calm down once she realized I wasn't backing down, I seriously underestimated how desperate people behave when they're facing financial ruin. 2 weeks into my dock construction, she pulled a move that would have been impressive if it wasn't so completely illegal. Marcus and I were working on the pilings when County Inspector Williams showed up unannounced. The whir of our power tools mixed with the splash of wood hitting water as we installed the foundation supports. Williams looked uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot as he explained why he was there. "I got a call yesterday," he said, not making eye contact. "Someone offered me $5,000 to find violations in your dock construction and revoke your permits." My hammer froze halfway to the nail. Marcus actually laughed out loud. "You're kidding me," he said. "She tried to bribe a county official?" Williams nodded grimly. "I've been doing this job for 15 years and I've never had someone be that direct about it. She said it would be mutually beneficial if I found some reason to shut down your project." Here's the mini twist that really showed how far gone Veronica was. She hadn't just tried to bribe Williams, she'd hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on me, and apparently he'd been asking around town about my divorce, my finances, even my work history. Small towns don't keep secrets well, and when a stranger starts asking personal questions about local folks, word gets around fast. The PI had been particularly interested in talking to my ex-wife, which was both pathetic and pointless. Sarah and I had divorced amicably. We just grew apart after the kids left home. There was no scandal, no hidden debt, no dark secrets to uncover. But Veronica was so convinced that everyone had skeletons in their closets that she was spending money she didn't have to find mine. Meanwhile, I reported the attempted bribery to the state attorney general's office, because trying to corrupt public officials is a felony regardless of whether the official takes the money. Williams was happy to provide a sworn statement about the conversation, complete with dates, times, and exact quotes. Here's a knowledge nugget that everyone should remember. Attempted bribery of public officials is a felony even if the official refuses the money. Always report such incidents immediately to the proper authorities, because corruption attempts create a paper trail that can be used in court. While all this drama was unfolding, my dock construction was proceeding beautifully. Marcus and I worked in the early mornings when the water was calm, and the sound of our tools created a steady rhythm that I actually found relaxing. The smell of fresh lumber mixed with lake water reminded me of all the summers I'd spent here as a kid, helping my grandfather with repairs. I decided to upgrade beyond the basic design. We installed underwater LED lighting that would create a stunning nighttime display, and we built bench seating along the sides for comfortable fishing. When we were done, it was going to be the most beautiful dock on the lake. The neighbors were starting to take notice too. Mrs. Patterson brought us thermos of coffee one morning, and Mr. Kowalski from the other side stopped by to ask about getting permits for his own dock repairs. It was turning into a regular community project, with people stopping by to watch the progress and offer encouragement. But Veronica wasn't done with her harassment campaign. She started spreading rumors around town about my divorce, claiming that my ex-wife had left me because of gambling debts and alcohol problems. Neither was true, but lies travel faster than truth in small communities. Her landscaper quit around this time, which provided some unexpected entertainment. The guy actually stopped by my place to explain why he was leaving. "Mr. Garrett," he said, shaking his head, "that lady is crazier than my ex-wife, and that's saying something. She wanted me to plant a row of pine trees specifically to block your view of the lake. I told her that would take 20 years to grow, and she asked if there was a way to make them grow faster with chemicals." The final straw for the landscaper was when Veronica asked him to park his truck across my driveway every morning by accident to make it harder for me to get to work. He'd drawn the line at actively harassing neighbors. As my dock neared completion, it became clear that Veronica's property value arguments were crumbling. My new structure looked professional, expensive, and perfectly legal. Instead of bringing down the neighborhood, it was actually enhancing it. I could see her standing on her deck in the evenings, staring across the water at my progress. The underwater lights were particularly beautiful at sunset, creating ripples of blue and white that danced on the water's surface. She was running out of time, running out of money, and running out of options. That's when desperate people make their biggest mistakes. As my dock construction entered its final week, Veronica's desperation reached a level that honestly started to concern me. She wasn't just being vindictive anymore. She was acting like someone who had nothing left to lose. It started with another anonymous complaint to the building inspector about dock safety concerns. The inspector showed up while Marcus and I were installing the final decking boards, the smell of fresh-cut cedar mixing with the morning lake breeze. He looked embarrassed as he explained why he was there. "I know this is probably nothing," he said, "but I have to follow up on safety complaints. Someone claimed your dock doesn't meet structural requirements." Marcus wiped his hands on his jeans and handed over the engineering report. Everything's built to code and then some. We've got load calculations, foundation specs, the works. This dock could probably support a small truck. The inspector spent about 10 minutes checking our work, then shook his head. Whoever called this in was either lying or doesn't know the first thing about construction. This is some of the finest work I've seen on the lake. But here's the mini twist that really showed how far Veronica had fallen. Someone had cut my dock ropes overnight. I discovered it the next morning when I went out for my usual coffee on the water. The ropes securing the floating section had been cleanly severed, and only the permanent pilings had kept the whole structure from drifting away. Thank God for security cameras. The footage clearly showed a figure in dark clothing, approaching my dock at 2:47 a.m., cutting the ropes with what looked like a utility knife, then retreating toward Veronica's property. The infrared camera captured enough detail to identify the person. It was her former landscaper, the one who'd quit but apparently still owed her some kind of favor. The sheriff's radio crackled as Deputy Morrison examined the cut ropes, the sound echoing across the still morning water. The crunch of gravel under his boots seemed unnaturally loud as he walked the perimeter, documenting everything. "This is definitely criminal mischief," he said, bagging the severed ropes as evidence. "Property damage over $1,000 becomes a felony in this state. Those ropes and the potential dock damage put you well over that threshold." Here's a knowledge nugget that everyone should remember. Property vandalism becomes a felony when damages exceed $1,000, 0 cents in most states. Always document replacement costs carefully, including labor and materials, because prosecutors need specific dollar amounts to file appropriate charges. While I was dealing with the vandalism, Veronica was trying a different approach. She organized what she called a concerned citizens petition to the county commissioners, claiming that my dock represented an environmental hazard and a precedent for uncontrolled development. She managed to get about 15 signatures, mostly from people who didn't live anywhere near the lake. I recognized several names as clients from her old law firm, and at least 3 were from her previous state. The desperation was becoming pathetic. The local newspaper got wind of the petition and sent a reporter to investigate. Jenny Walsh from the Lake County Tribune is a sharp woman who doesn't like people wasting her time with manufactured controversies. After about 2 hours of research, she discovered Veronica's history of frivolous lawsuits and her current financial troubles. "I've covered municipal politics for 12 years, Jenny told me over coffee at Murphy's. I've never seen anyone sue more people than a parking meter. This woman has filed more legal complaints than the rest of the county combined." The reporter's investigation revealed something that made me laugh out loud. Veronica had tried to get the story placed as a front-page environmental crisis, but when Jenny started asking for specifics about the hazards, Veronica couldn't provide any actual evidence. No environmental studies, no expert testimony, no documentation of any kind. Meanwhile, the supportive neighbors had started their own petition. Mrs. Patterson organized it, and within 3 days they had 47 signatures from actual lake residents praising my dock project and requesting that the county expedite similar permits for other property owners. Mr. Kowalski had taken photos of my dock from every angle and was using them to plan his own renovation. "It's beautiful work," he told the reporter. "This is the kind of improvement that makes the whole community better." The structural engineer I'd hired for the project volunteered to provide a statement to the county commissioners. His report confirmed that my dock not only met all current safety standards but actually exceeded them by a significant margin. As the commissioner meeting date approached, I could see the writing on the wall. Veronica had burned through her credibility with false complaints, illegal bribery attempts, and now criminal vandalism. She'd turned what should have been a simple property dispute into a community-wide conflict that she was clearly losing. The sound of her BMW starting up across the lake had become a daily reminder that her time was running out. Every morning, I could see her pacing on her deck, phone pressed to her ear, probably talking to lawyers who were billing her hundreds of dollars an hour to tell her what I could have told her for free. She was fighting a battle she couldn't win. The county commissioners' meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, and by 6:30, the room was packed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the nervous coughing and rustling of papers filled the air as neighbors filed in from both sides of the controversy. Jenny Walsh from the Tribune sat in the front row with her notebook ready, and I spotted Deputy Morrison near the back, there to provide testimony about the vandalism incident. The smell of instant coffee from the lobby mixed with the tension in the room as people settled into their folding chairs. Veronica arrived fashionably late, pulling a wheeled suitcase full of presentation materials. She'd clearly spent serious money on her case, professional poster boards, a laptop for her PowerPoint presentation, and a thick binder of what she claimed was expert testimony. "Commissioners," she began, her voice carrying that practiced attorney confidence, "we're here tonight to address a serious environmental threat to our pristine lake community." For 20 minutes, she delivered a presentation that would have been impressive if any of it had been true. She talked about uncontrolled development, environmental degradation, and precedent-setting violations that would destroy the lake's ecosystem. Her mini twist came when she produced what she called an independent environmental impact study that she'd commissioned. According to this report, my dock was disrupting fish spawning patterns, increasing erosion, and contributing to algae blooms. The problem was, I'd done my homework too. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. "Commissioners, I've lived on this lake my entire life. My family has been good stewards of this land for 3 generations. Everything I've built has been done with proper permits, following all regulations, and with respect for the environment." I pulled out my own presentation materials, not fancy poster boards, but clear documentation. Photos of my grandfather's original dock from the 1970s, the county engineer's survey from 1967, and the current structural engineering report that proved my dock exceeded all safety requirements. Then came my mic drop moment. "Mrs. Whitmore has spent months claiming that my dock is an environmental hazard," I said, connecting my laptop to the projector. "But I'd like to show you what my security cameras captured last week." The room went silent as the footage played. Clear as day, you could see a figure cutting my dock ropes at 2:47 a.m., then retreating toward Veronica's property. The timestamp, GPS coordinates, and infrared clarity made it impossible to dispute. "This is the kind of environmental protection we're dealing with," I continued. "Criminal vandalism designed to damage the very structure she claims to be concerned about." But I wasn't done. I pulled out the photos I'd taken of her property, the algae bloom near her shoreline, the chemical fertilizer runoff, and most damaging of all, clear measurements showing her dock extended 30 feet beyond her property line into public waters. "If we're going to talk about environmental violations," I said, "let's talk about the illegal dock extension that's been dumping chemicals into our lake for 18 months. The room erupted. Neighbors who'd been sitting quietly started murmuring, and I could see Commissioner Bradley taking notes furiously. Veronica's face had gone pale, and she was frantically whispering to the expensive lawyer she'd brought with her. Deputy Morrison stood up when called upon. "The vandalism complaint has been forwarded to the district attorney's office. We have clear evidence of criminal mischief, and charges are pending." Mrs. Patterson testified next, speaking for the 47 neighbors who'd signed the petition supporting my dock. "Garrett has been a good neighbor for 30 years. His dock is beautiful, and it's inspired several of us to improve our own properties." The county environmental inspector provided the final blow. "We've conducted a thorough investigation of the alleged violations. Mr. Garrett's dock meets or exceeds all environmental standards. However, we have identified several actual violations on the complainant's property that require immediate remediation." Commissioner Bradley leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, are you prepared to address the allegations about your own property violations?" That's when everything fell apart for Veronica. Her lawyer started shuffling papers, whispering urgently in her ear. You could see the exact moment she realized that her expensive presentation had backfired spectacularly. We need to review these new allegations," she stammered, her attorney confidence completely gone. Jenny Walsh raised her hand. "Mrs. Whitmore, can you comment on the tax lien from your previous state and how it relates to this property dispute?" Veronica's eyes went wide. She grabbed her presentation materials, stuffed them haphazardly into her suitcase, and headed for the door. "No comment," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The commissioners voted unanimously to approve my dock project and ordered an immediate investigation of the violations on Veronica's property. As people filed out of the meeting, neighbors stopped to shake my hand and congratulate me on the beautiful work. Outside in the parking lot, I could see Veronica's BMW speeding away, her expensive lawyer following in his sedan. The sound of their engines fading into the distance felt like the end of a very long nightmare. 3 months later, I'm sitting on the most beautiful dock on the lake, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and pink. The sound of children laughing carries across the water from the new family that bought Veronica's house, and the gentle splash of swimmers enjoying the morning calm reminds me why I fought so hard to protect this place. Veronica's downfall came faster than anyone expected. Within a week of the commissioner's meeting, her mortgage company had discovered the undisclosed tax lien and environmental violations. They demanded immediate payment of the full loan balance, money she simply didn't have. The property went into foreclosure and she was forced to sell at a significant loss just to avoid criminal prosecution for the bribery and vandalism charges. The new owners, the Morrison family, are everything Veronica wasn't. They introduced themselves the day they moved in, bringing homemade cookies and asking if I had any advice about living on the lake. Their 3 kids spend their afternoons swimming and fishing, and the sound of their laughter has replaced the oppressive silence that used to come from that direction. My dock became the model for responsible lakefront development. The county started using my construction specifications as the template for new permit applications, and I've helped 3 other neighbors obtain proper permits for their own projects. Mrs. Patterson's new deck is particularly lovely. She followed my design, but added flower boxes along the railings. The whole experience restored my confidence in a way I hadn't expected. For months, I'd felt like David facing Goliath, but I learned that sometimes the giant is just a bully with expensive lawyers and a lot of debt. Truth, patience, and good documentation beat intimidation every time. Mr. Kowalski finished his dock renovation last month and stopped by to thank me for the inspiration. I never would have tackled this project without seeing what you accomplished, he said, admiring the underwater lighting that creates such beautiful reflections at sunset. You showed the whole community that we don't have to put up with bullies. The legal resolution was surprisingly clean. Veronica's lawyer negotiated a plea deal that avoided jail time but required full restitution for the vandalism and a formal apology. She moved out of state, again, and I haven't heard from her since. Sometimes the best revenge really is just living well. I established a lakefront preservation fund last spring, using some of the insurance money from the vandalism settlement. The scholarship helps local kids attend summer camp and boat safety classes, and we've started an annual community dock building workshop for DIY enthusiasts. It's amazing how much people want to learn when they see what's possible. The first workshop drew 23 participants, including 2 teenagers who'd never held a power tool before. Watching them measure, cut, and assemble their first project reminded me of working with my grandfather all those years ago. He would have loved seeing young people learn to build things with their own hands. My property value increased by about 30% after the dock completion. But more importantly, I've got my peace back. Every morning I make my coffee and sit on the dock, watching the lake wake up. The loons still call from the far shore, and the mist still rises off the water like it did when I was a kid. The community has grown stronger too. We've started monthly potluck dinners, and this summer we're planning the first annual Lake Heritage Festival. It'll feature boat races, fishing contests, and a showcase of all the beautiful docks that have been built in the past year. But I've got to tell you, I'm already working on my next story. You wouldn't believe what happened to my neighbor Bill when his HOA tried to fine him for flying the American flag in his front yard. The man's a decorated veteran, and when they told him his flag was a visual nuisance, well, let's just say the HOA president learned some things about federal law that they didn't teach in their property management seminar. You've got your own HOA nightmare or property dispute story? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and some of your stories are even crazier than mine. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because next week I'm telling you about the HOA president who tried to fine a veteran for flying the American flag and how the whole community fought back to protect his rights. He's just some old electrician. What's he gonna do? That's what Veronica told her lawyer before I sued her for harassment, exposed her financial crimes, and got her charged with attempted bribery. The arrogance was breathtaking. She'd spent 18 months trying to steal my family's lakefront property, using fake environmental reports and frivolous lawsuits. This entitled former attorney thought she could intimidate a working-class guy into selling his grandfather's land for pennies. What Veronica didn't know? This old electrician had been documenting every illegal move she made. While she burned through $80,000, 0 cents in legal fees, I spent $200, 0 cents, on research that would destroy her completely. I'm standing on my beautiful new dock watching her empty mansion across the water. Sometimes the best revenge is patience, letting entitled people hang themselves with their own rope. What would you do if someone tried stealing your family's land? Drop a comment below. You're about to enjoy this takedown. Let me take you back to where this whole mess started. I inherited this little slice of paradise from my grandfather, a mechanic who bought these 2.5 acres of pristine lakefront back in 1967 for $3,000. Can you believe that? $3,000 for 200 feet of shoreline in a small cabin that still smells like pine sap and old coffee. The dock was original too, weathered gray boards that creaked like old bones every time you stepped on them. I'd spent my childhood summers here learning to fish off those same boards, listening to my grandfather's stories about the good old days when neighbors actually helped each other instead of trying to sue each other into bankruptcy. After my divorce, I moved back to the cabin full-time. I work as an electrical contractor, and honestly, there's nothing better than coming home to the sound of water lapping against the shore after a long day of dealing with other people's problems. The place needed work, the dock was falling apart, the cabin needed new wiring, but it was mine, and it was peaceful. Then Veronica Whitmore moved in. 18 months ago, she dropped $1.2 million on the modern monstrosity across the water. Glass and steel angles that look like they're trying to cut the sky in half. The thing is so out of place, it makes the lake look like a movie set. But hey, it's a free country, right? People can build whatever they want on their own land. Veronica is one of those women who looks like she stepped out of a catalog for expensive athleisure wear. Perfect highlights, designer everything, drives a white BMW X5 that she keeps so clean you could eat off the hood. She's a former real estate attorney who somehow got herself elected president of our Lakefront community's HOA board, despite the fact that our little community never had an HOA in the first place. The problem started immediately. First, it was noise complaints about my weekend boat repair work. I've got this old bass boat with a diesel engine that sounds like a freight train when it's running, but I only work on it during reasonable hours. The county inspector came out, found absolutely nothing wrong, and told me to keep doing what I was doing. Then Veronica's guests started parking on our narrow access road, blocking my truck. When I politely asked them to move, she'd come storming out of her house like I'd personally insulted her ancestors. "This is a private road," she'd shriek. Which was technically true, but it was private to all of us, not just her. I could smell the diesel fumes from my boat engine mixing with the metallic clang of my tools as I worked on the dock repairs. It was honest work, the kind of my grandfather would have been proud of, but every time I picked up a wrench, I could feel her watching me from her perfect deck with her perfect wine glass. The real warning sign started when she hired a surveyor. You know that electronic beeping sound they make when they're taking measurements? That sound echoed across the water for 3 days straight. Then she started showing up at our community potluck dinners, spreading rumors about unsafe structures and environmental hazards. She was building a case, and I was too busy living my life to notice. But here's what I learned about people like Veronica. They always overplay their hand. They're so convinced they're smarter than everyone else, they forget that regular folks have been dealing with bullies a lot longer than they've been practicing law. The surveyor's beeping stopped, and I thought maybe she'd lost interest. I should have known better. Veronica Whitmore doesn't lose interest. She just changes tactics. She was already digging through county records, looking for any excuse to challenge my family's rightful ownership of this land. Little did I know, she was about to claim that my grandfather's dock, the one I'd been using for 30 years, was somehow illegal. 3 weeks after the surveyor finished his work, I got a certified letter that made my blood boil. Veronica had discovered what she claimed was a significant discrepancy in the 1970S property survey documents. According to her newly hired expert, my dock extended 15 feet into what she called disputed waterfront territory. But here's the mini twist that really got me. She didn't just file a complaint with the county zoning office. She produced an entire survey report claiming that my family's shoreline access had been illegal for over 50 years. 50 years. This woman had the audacity to suggest that 3 generations of my family had been trespassing on our own property. I'll admit, for about 10 minutes I was worried. Legal documents have a way of making you question everything, even when you know you're right. But then I remembered something my grandfather used to say. When someone's trying to bamboozle you with fancy papers, go back to the source. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I went digging through my grandfather's old papers in the basement. The musty smell of old documents and the way dust motes danced in the bare light bulb reminded me of treasure hunting as a kid. Except this time, the treasure was my family's legal right to this land. That's when I found it, the original 1967 deed with my grandfather's hand-drawn property map. But more importantly, I found the survey documentation. Turns out, my grandfather's survey wasn't done by some fly-by-night private company. It was conducted by the county engineer himself, stamped and filed with the state. Here's a knowledge nugget for anyone dealing with property disputes. Always verify who conducted your original property surveys. County engineers and state surveyors carry significantly more legal weight than private surveying companies. Their work is considered the gold standard in property disputes. While I was getting my facts straight, Veronica was busy playing politics. She started casually mentioning to neighbors that my property might be encroaching on public waterfront. She organized something called a Lakefront Preservation Committee meeting, which sounds official until you realize the committee consisted of her landscaper, and Mrs. Henderson from down the road, who showed up thinking it was about controlling the water lily population. I have to laugh thinking about poor Mrs. Henderson sitting there with her notebook, ready to discuss aquatic plant management, while Veronica launched into a presentation about illegal structures and property line violations. The woman left halfway through, muttering something about how she just wanted to talk about the ducks. But Veronica wasn't done. She had connections at the county office, and she knew how to use them. 2 days after I found my grandfather's original documents, I received another certified letter. This one was from the county itself, demanding that I remove my dock within 30 days or face legal action. I remember standing on my deck, reading that letter, while the late afternoon sun made the water look like liquid gold. Across the lake, I could see Veronica on her perfect deck with her perfect wine glass, probably watching me through binoculars. She was smirking. I could tell even from that distance. That's when I realized this wasn't just about property lines or legal technicalities. This was about power. Veronica had decided that my little cabin and weathered dock were bringing down her property values, and she was going to use her legal background to force me out. But here's what she didn't count on. I might be just an electrician, but I come from a long line of people who don't back down from bullies. My grandfather didn't spend his life savings on this land just so some entitled attorney could steal it with fancy paperwork and intimidation tactics. I took one more look at that letter, then I took a photo of it and sent it to my cousin Ruby. She's a paralegal with a nose for legal nonsense and a real talent for making attorneys regret their career choices. If Veronica wanted to play hardball, she was about to learn why you don't mess with working-class families who've been dealing with people like her for generations. The smell of charcoal from someone's barbecue drifted across the water, mixing with the pine scent from the trees around my cabin. Normal people were having normal evenings while Veronica was probably in her glass house, planning her next move. Little did she know, I was planning mine too. And unlike her expensive legal strategies, mine was going to be based on something really dangerous. The truth. Just when I thought Veronica had played all her cards, she pulled out a move that almost knocked me off my feet. 2 weeks after the county dock removal notice, I got a visit from an EPA inspector. Not county, not state, federal Environmental Protection Agency. Apparently someone had filed an anonymous complaint claiming that my dock was damaging sensitive wetland habitat. The inspector, a serious-looking woman with a clipboard and an attitude, informed me that I was facing a potential $50,000 fine for environmental violations. $50,000 for a dock that had been there longer than some of the trees around it. Here's the mini twist that really got me steaming. While I'm dealing with this EPA nightmare, Veronica volunteers to mediate the dispute. She shows up at my door with a folder full of documents and an offer to buy my property for $40,000. 40 grand for land worth easily double that. And she's presenting it like she's doing me a favor. I understand you're having some legal difficulties, she said, standing on my porch in her designer hiking boots that had probably never seen a real trail. This could all go away if you just accept a reasonable offer. I wanted to laugh, but I was too angry. This woman had created the problem, and now she was offering to solve it by stealing my family's land for half its value. But Ruby always taught me that when someone's trying to scam you, the best defense is good research, so I started making some calls. First, I contacted the local environmental groups. Turns out, there's no wetland designation anywhere near my property. The closest protected wetland is 2 miles upstream. Then I did something that really opened my eyes. I took a walk around Veronica's property. The smell of stagnant water hit me before I even got close to her shoreline. There was an algae bloom near her dock, the kind you get when chemical fertilizers run off into the water. A little more investigating revealed that her landscaping project had dumped nitrogen-heavy fertilizer directly into the lake just 3 months earlier. But the real kicker was when I measured her dock, 30 feet beyond her property line, extending into public waterfront. The woman lecturing me about environmental protection and property rights had built an illegal structure that was actually harming the lake. I started documenting everything: photos with timestamps, GPS coordinates, copies of every piece of correspondence. My phone's camera roll started looking like a legal case file. The crunch of gravel under my boots as I walked her property line, the mechanical click of my camera shutter, it all felt like gathering evidence for a war I never wanted to fight. That's when I discovered I wasn't her first target. Mrs. Patterson, the widow who lives on the other side of the lake, told me Veronica had been using the same intimidation tactics on her. Apparently, Veronica had complained to the county about Mrs. Patterson's unsafe tree trimming, which was really just an elderly woman trying to keep branches from falling on her roof. The best part? Mrs. Patterson confided that Veronica had once threatened to report her bird feeders as wildlife harassment. Bird feeders! This woman had actually argued that feeding chickadees and cardinals was somehow disturbing the natural ecosystem. Here's a knowledge nugget for anyone dealing with environmental complaints. Document everything with timestamps and GPS coordinates. Environmental agencies require actual proof of violations, not just anonymous complaints from vindictive neighbors. They take false reporting seriously, and it can backfire spectacularly on the person making frivolous claims. I spent the next week building my case. Every photo was date-stamped and location tagged. Every conversation was followed up with an email summary. I even started recording my interactions with county officials, which is perfectly legal in our state, as long as one party consents. The EPA inspector came back a week later with a very different attitude. After reviewing my documentation and conducting her own investigation, she found no evidence of environmental violations. In fact, she was quite interested in the photos I'd taken of the algae bloom near Veronica's property. I was standing on my dock when I saw Veronica's BMW pull into her driveway. She got out and looked across the water at me, and I swear I could see the exact moment she realized her bluff had been called. Her shoulders sagged, and she stood there for a long moment before disappearing into her glass house. But I knew this wasn't over. People like Veronica don't give up when their first plan fails. They just get more desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. I had no idea how desperate she was about to get. If I thought Veronica would back down after the EPA debacle, I seriously underestimated just how far entitled people will go when they're cornered. 3 days after the environmental inspector cleared my dock, I got served with papers that made my previous problems look like parking tickets. Veronica had hired one of those expensive downtown law firms, the kind with marble lobbies and hourly rates that could finance a small car. She was filing for a restraining order, claiming I had been engaging in menacing behavior and property damage. According to her sworn statement, I had been aggressively creating disturbances to harass her family. The mini twist that really floored me? She claimed I had damaged her landscaping by trespassing and vandalizing her property. This was completely fabricated, but she had photos of some torn plants near our property line and witness statements from her landscaper backing up her story. The judge granted a temporary restraining order. I was banned from using my own dock until the court hearing, which was scheduled for 3 weeks out. 3 weeks during prime fishing season, when I'd normally be out on the water every evening after work. While I'm dealing with this legal nightmare, Veronica immediately starts using the disputed shoreline for her own purposes. I watched from my cabin window as she set up kayak storage right where my dock access had been. The woman wasn't even trying to hide her real agenda anymore. But here's where having family who understand the system really pays off. My cousin Ruby is a paralegal with 20 years of experience, and she has a particular talent for finding things that lawyers would rather keep buried. The fluorescent lights in the courthouse basement made everything look sickly green, but Ruby's sneakers squeaked with determination as she pulled file after file. "Garrett," she said, sliding a folder across the table in that underground records room, "your neighbor has quite a history." Turns out Veronica had been sanctioned twice for filing frivolous lawsuits in her previous state. Once for trying to sue a neighbor over tree shadows affecting her garden, and once for attempting to claim adverse possession of a parking space that had never belonged to her property. But Ruby's research revealed something even more interesting. Veronica had a pattern of using restraining orders as a harassment tool. She'd file for protection, then use the temporary orders to gain tactical advantages in property disputes. While Ruby was doing the legal detective work, I was handling the practical side. I installed security cameras on my property, being very careful to position them so they only captured my own land and the public areas. The whir of the drill as I mounted the cameras felt satisfying. Finally, I was taking action instead of just reacting to her attacks. 2 days later, those cameras proved their worth in a way I never expected. Veronica decided to throw a lakefront party. Nothing wrong with that, except she deliberately had her guests park on my access road, completely blocking my driveway. I couldn't get my truck out if I'd wanted to. When I politely asked people to move their cars, they looked at me like I was the crazy neighbor bothering their good time. That's when inspiration struck. I ordered 3 large pizzas delivered to my own address. When the delivery driver couldn't get through the maze of luxury cars blocking the road, he called me from the bottom of the hill. I told him to lay on the horn until someone moved. Nothing quite kills the ambiance of an upscale lakefront party like a pizza delivery driver honking continuously at a traffic jam of BMWs and Mercedes. Veronica's guests started getting irritated, then angry, then they started leaving. The sound of car doors slamming and engines starting created a chain reaction that cleared my road in about 15 minutes. The best part? Veronica called the police about suspicious vehicles in the area. When the officer arrived and recognized the pizza delivery situation, he had to bite his lip to keep from laughing. He politely explained to Veronica that blocking someone's driveway was actually illegal, and that pizza delivery didn't constitute suspicious activity. Here's a knowledge nugget for anyone dealing with restraining order harassment. These orders require specific evidence of actual threats or harmful behavior. Vague accusations of menacing behavior or aggressive confrontation won't hold up in court without documented proof of specific incidents and credible witness testimony. But the real game changer came the next morning. My security cameras had captured something beautiful. Veronica's landscaper dumping construction debris on my property at 2 a.m. Bags of concrete mix, broken tiles, and pruned branches, all tossed just over the property line where Veronica thought I wouldn't notice. I sat in my kitchen with my morning coffee, watching the footage on my laptop. The timestamp clearly showed the date and time, the GPS coordinates proved the location, and the landscaper's face was perfectly visible in the infrared recording. Ruby was going to love this. The smoking gun came in the form of a tax document that Ruby found buried in public records from Veronica's previous state. She called me at 6 in the morning, practically vibrating with excitement through the phone. "Garrett, you need to get down here right now. I've found something that changes everything." I drove to Ruby's office with my coffee still steaming, and what she showed me made my jaw drop. Veronica's perfect lakefront property had a massive tax lien attached to it. $127,000 from her previous state, plus penalties and interest that were accumulating daily. But here's the major twist that really blew my mind. Veronica's mortgage company had no idea about this lien. The original seller had never disclosed the environmental remediation requirements from when the property was a gas station back in the 1980s. Veronica's pristine lakefront paradise was sitting on contaminated soil that needed a $200,000 cleanup. Ruby's printer was churning out document after document, and the smell of hot toner filled her small office. "She's not just being a difficult neighbor," Ruby explained, highlighting key passages. "She's financially desperate. This lien follows property owners across state lines, and when her mortgage company finds out, they can call the entire..." Suddenly, everything made sense. Veronica's aggressive timeline, her willingness to spend tens of thousands on lawyers, her desperate attempts to acquire my property. She wasn't just being entitled, she was racing against financial disaster. My property was the key to her escape plan. With direct access to deep water, my shoreline was crucial for attracting premium buyers who could afford to pay enough to cover her debts. Without it, she was stuck with a contaminated property, mounting legal bills, and a mortgage company that was going to be very unhappy when they discovered her little secret. The power dynamics had completely shifted. For months, I'd been playing defense against someone I thought was just a bully with too much money and time. But Veronica wasn't operating from a position of strength. She was drowning, and she was trying to use my family's land as her life preserver. Here's a knowledge nugget that could save you thousands. Property liens follow owners across state lines and accumulate interest daily. Always check all jurisdictions when buying real estate because sellers aren't required to disclose liens from other states unless specifically asked. I felt a strange mixture of anger and pity sitting in Ruby's office. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for Veronica. Financial pressure can make people do desperate things. But then I remembered her smug smile as she watched me get served with legal papers, her casual willingness to destroy my family's legacy for her own benefit. My grandfather used to say, "Never kick a dog when it's down, but don't let it bite you either." Veronica had been trying to bite me for months, and now I understood why. She had 90 days before the next lien payment was due, and if she missed it, the state could start seizure proceedings. The timeline suddenly made perfect sense. She needed to resolve the property dispute, flip the house, and get out of town before her financial house of cards collapsed. Every delay cost her money she didn't have. I, on the other hand, could afford to wait. I had a stable income, a paid-off property, and the truth on my side. Time was my ally and her enemy. "So what's our move?" I asked Ruby, watching her organize the documents into neat piles. She smiled, the kind of smile that defense attorneys have nightmares about. We let her keep digging her own grave, and we document every shovelful.